Hi, and welcome to this discussion of metabolism. What is it, and how does it change with age and exercise? I want you to think of your body as a biological machine. All machines require energy to power them. Just like a toaster oven is plugged into the wall, deriving its energy to toast things from electricity, we require energy, only it's not in the form of electricity. It comes from the chemical bonds in the foods that we eat. Now, we have to have the ability to take that energy, harness it, store it, and use it. And basically, the regulation of that process of energy assimilation, use, transfer, that is the sum of our metabolism. So, our metabolism is basically the sum total of all the complex biochemical reactions and pathways in the body that regulate energy flux, or the way that energy comes in, is stored, transferred, and used. So you're not like a toaster oven. You're actually more like a car. We can't stay tethered to our energy source. We can't be eating constantly to provide ourselves with constant energy. And just like a car, we fuel up during times and then we use the energy that we carry around with us in a tank. So in this analogy, our metabolism is like the engine of the car. An engine takes the energy and turns it into, or converts it into, power to propel the car. In much the same way, our metabolism takes the stored energy, or the energy coming in when we're eating, to power us, to keep us alive and to keep us moving. So our gas tanks are our stored forms of energy that we carry around to access when we're not eating. And those are two forms. So we're much like a hybrid vehicle. We have two forms of stored energy. One is glycogen and the other is fat. Glycogen is a carbohydrate and it's stored in the liver and in muscle cells. The liver doesn't change in size appreciably as we get older, okay? And after adolescence. But our muscle mass, on the other hand, changes dramatically over decades. It's estimated that we lose about 3 to 8% per decade of life starting from age 30. So more if you're less active, and you can slow that significantly if you do the right kind of muscle building and preserving exercises. So you can appreciate right away the impact that aging might have on your body's ability to store energy. Okay. And what isn't stored as glycogen is therefore stored as fat. And fat is a very efficient way to store energy in the body because it can store a lot of energy in a very light format. Someone who has a lot of muscle has a lot more glycogen stores, and glycogen is stored with water, and this is dense and heavy. So they may weigh more than someone who has less muscle mass, but has a lot more fat. They're storing more energy, but in a light form. Our fat stores amount to our adipose cells or fat cells. And actually, past a certain point in late adolescence, we have a fixed number of fat cells that can grow or shrink in size. Genetically, some people have more, but our early childhood life experiences also influence how many fat cells we have in adulthood. Now, that's not to say that we're destined to have more fat on our bodies. The amount of fat we carry depends entirely on energy flux. The other thing I want to mention is that while there are genetic influences to how many fat cells you have, our metabolism is mostly influenced by lifestyle, not genetics. So it can change as a result of things that happen over our adult life. But metabolic genetic diseases are quite rare and manifest in infants and in young toddlers with diseases. Storage diseases of various types, metabolic conditions where fuel is not used normally and causes toxic byproducts, things like this. Also, childhood obesity manifests in these conditions. But weight that you gain through your adult life isn't due to genetic defects in your metabolism because, of course, your genes don't change through your adult life. I want to come back to this idea of how much energy is stored in the tank. While you may have a larger bathtub, to use a new analogy, this might represent the number of fat cells you have by genetics and by your early childhood experiences and lifestyle. But that doesn't mean that bathtub is full. Okay, so others might have a small tub, you have a larger tub, but how much water is in the tub at any given time is a matter of how much water is coming in versus how much is going out. And your body fat storage depends entirely upon long-term changes in the energy coming in as food versus the energy going out in various ways. So naturally, if you imagine that if you plug the drain and run the faucet, the water level rises in much the same way. If you don't use a lot of energy, but you continue eating a certain amount of energy from food, then your body has to store that energy. It has to go somewhere, and it stays stored as increasing sizes of your fat cells. If you conversely turn off the faucet and open the drain, then you'll have the water level falling. And in much the same way, if your energy expenditure exceeds the energy coming in as food, the amount of fat in those fat cells goes down. Okay. And if there is no change in the water level, it's because equivalent amounts over time are coming and going. The rate of entry matches the rate of exit. And in this case, the analogy for your body fat, or the amount of stored energy you're carrying around, is because there's no net change in what's coming in and what's going out over time. Now, the one thing I'll point out in this graphic is that they illustrate that the food intake is the energy in, but the output of energy relates to activity. It looks like someone is running. And this is something I want to talk further about. Yes, energy can't come in any other way. It doesn't appear on your body. Fat is a result of energy at one time that you took in the form of food energy. Now, the output side of the equation is a lot more complicated. We don't only use energy to move. In fact, we use energy in a variety of ways. And I'm here to tell you that movement, whether deliberate or not, is actually a small proportion of the total energy you expend in a day. So what is the energy you expend in a day? Well, this graph illustrates nicely the proportion of energy expended in a single day relative to the total for different energy expenses that our body has. So every day there's a certain amount of exercise that you perform. That's deliberate movement. Things like walking your dog, or doing your weight training, or going on a bike ride constitutes exercise. And as you can see, it's a small sliver at the top. In fact, this graph probably overestimates it, because I've seen the estimate at 5%, and that's for a moderately active person. Sedentary people, this would be much smaller. Then you have something called NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that's an acronym that simply refers to non-deliberate movement. Any movement that you do by virtue of who you are. So some people are just fidgeters, and they're people who can never sit still. You know the type. And then there's people who, by virtue of their day-to-day life, like the things they have to do, like if they clean homes or work on an assembly line or at a construction site, or they're constantly on their feet for work, these people have inherent energy demands related to movement that's not deliberate exercise. But even when you combine those two things, exercise and NEAT, the movement related energy demands, those are still small relative to the rest. Okay. In fact, we'd be estimating the combined impact of those things to be a maximum of 20%. And I think in this graphic, it's probably overstated, quite honestly. The larger proportion comes from something called the resting metabolic rate, which I'll get to in a moment, because I want to just touch on the thermic effect of food, which, as you can see, is probably one of the tinier contributions, but that's the amount of energy it takes to digest and absorb your food. And people will talk at length about the different thermic effect of different nutrients, and how if you eat certain foods, they require more energy to absorb, and therefore you don't store it. The differences that come from that are so minute on the total daily energy expenditure, because we're talking about, a difference of 10% of 10%. You know what I mean? So where we want to look at having the greatest impact is in this big red box that's called our resting metabolic rate, or the rate at which our body uses energy just merely existing, the energy required to keep us alive, as it were. So even with no movement, we're actually burning the majority of our calories just trying to power our brains, our livers, our bones even, they require energy at rest because we're living things. So what goes into that? Well, first of all, it's common for people to focus their energy on expending energy through movement and thinking that that's the greatest mover of the dial. But if we do not have a strong resting metabolism, or if that metabolism slows down with age, you can appreciate that that will have a much bigger impact on our total daily energy expenditure, even if other things remain equal. So what is happening to change that metabolic rate? Well, when it comes to exercise, most people think of what they're doing from a day-to-day perspective and how many calories they expended there. But as I'm trying to emphasize, that's a sliver at the top of this equation. What actually works is what these people are doing. They're illustrating something quite different. They're not doing a grueling workout trying to focus on how many calories they expended. They're enjoying a lifestyle that's active. Why does that work? Because habitual exercise is what benefits your metabolism, and here is how. Age and exercise influence metabolism through their effects on two things: your muscle mass and your mitochondria. We've already said that muscle mass is the place where glycogen is stored. If you don't have any place for glycogen, most of what you eat will have to go to a fat storage form. That's a minor contribution to how muscles play a role in this story. Muscles rather influence metabolism because they're so energy expensive. So just sitting around as a muscular person is energy demanding because they require a lot of energy at rest. So we can shrink and grow this energy basin significantly based on how we exercise. But not all exercise is created equal. As you probably know by now, you need to focus on building muscle if you want to have an impact on this basin. Muscles are also important in this story in that they relate to the second important impact of exercise, in that they're the warehouse for these little things called mitochondria. They're so important to health, wellness, and prevention of disease. I can't even. Mitochondria are like cellular batteries. They are what convert your food energy into something called ATP, the energy currency of your body. Okay. And it's cardio activity, things that raise your heart rate for sustained periods or for intervals of time, that builds these and makes them work better. So people who are very active have high numbers of these in their muscles, and they work very efficiently for converting energy very, very well. So on demand, people who have a lot of mitochondria are simply able to generate huge amounts of energy. And thus they're less likely to get tired doing things, because they have a huge capacity for energy expense or for energy generation. And you don't have to store as much if you're capable of using it efficiently, right? So the story is in muscles and mitochondria. You can't influence the number of mitochondria in your brains and your liver, but you can hugely influence your muscle mass and then subsequently the amount and efficiency of the mitochondria. So these muscles and mitochondria, they go hand in hand. And when you train with the right approaches, you can optimize both and have an impact on your metabolism and preserve it over time. The most common thing I hear in response to this is that I've always moved and I'm eating the same way, but still I'm gaining weight. So something has to have changed. Yes, things have changed, but what looks the same isn't always the same. If someone could follow you around, a scientist, and document clearly, objectively, exactly how you're eating and how you're moving, I guarantee there'd be age-related changes there. Things influence our choices of food and the way we choose to move our bodies, how often we can move it, and how intensely we can tolerate moving it. I know for myself that recovery is a lot slower now that I'm older, so I can't move as intensely as often. So these things subtly influence the inputs and outputs, right? And they have an impact on our muscle mass and our metabolism through mitochondria. So even though we think things are the same, often these age-related factors influence the inputs and outputs and fundamentally change how our bodies function. So I'm here to tell you not to be discouraged, because the reality is most of this is influenced by lifestyle. And I'm not here to tell you it's easy, but I'm here to tell you that it's possible to change the dial on the inputs and outputs and influence your metabolism by paying attention to moving regularly. So age diminishes our metabolism through its impact on our muscle mass and our mitochondrial density and function, but the great upside is that exercise can remedy both of them if done habitually, and that's important because any time off can cause a reduction in muscle mass. If you take months off at a time of strength building, muscle building, aerobic training, we know that adaptations go away, the mitochondrial density falls, and the muscle mass goes down. So we have to find sustainable methods to stay active and do it as a lifestyle, because in this case, you build the things that matter most. It's not a day-to-day impact, it's an engine you're building, and it's what's going to serve you well long term in helping you regulate your body composition. So I welcome any questions. For those of you who would like to send them to me, Tina at coachmckinnis.com is my email, and I'd love to hear from you. I hope you found this interesting and educational.